Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 6 running back rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be covering a variety of topics, starting off with waiver wire additions. A little bit later tonight, for many of our leagues, waivers are going to run. But on last night's Monday Night Football game between the New Orleans Saints and Los Angeles Chargers, there were a plethora of breakout performances and players that are probably available in many of your leagues that you should be potentially picking up. Both teams go on bye week here in Week 6, so you could potentially snag these guys very sneakily on waivers tonight. So I'm going to mention a couple players that I think you should be interested in potentially going and picking up based on the breakout games they had yesterday. Outside of that, we'll talk about some running back matchups, as in which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season in a half PPR scoring format, who has the most advantageous matchup going into this upcoming week. Then we'll talk about my top 36 running back rankings. Now, before we begin, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. I mean, we are so close to getting to 30,000 subscribers here on YouTube. If you guys have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We are going to be making 2020 fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button. I really do appreciate those of you who have been around supporting the channel for quite some time. I really do. And I cannot express into words how appreciative I am of you guys supporting my efforts as we've gone through over the last couple of years. So thank you once again. Outside of that, make sure you click a like button, leave a comment, and let's get into it, shall we? So I wanted to first and foremost talk about some waiver wire pickups going into Week 6. Last night on Monday Night Football, Justin Herbert was incredible. A 4 passing touchdown game. Even with Keenan Allen missing the second half, he was absolutely fantastic. His upcoming schedule, like I've mentioned before in the last couple of weeks, is going to be extremely advantageous for them. They play against the Jaguars, Denver, the Raiders, the Miami Dolphins, the Jets. These are going to be games that are not only winnable for the Los Angeles Chargers, but are going to put Justin Herbert in a advantageous position to potentially just throw the ball the majority of the time. Now, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Keenan Allen did miss majority of the second half, or the entire second half, with a back injury. That really gave Mike Williams an opportunity to step up as the number one wide receiver of that team. He had 2 receiving touchdowns yesterday. A good amount of grabs for over 100 receiving yards, made some clutch plays late in the game, and Justin Herbert relied upon him, and that's a great sight to see. Of course, this offense was functioning through the air majority of the time, but on the ground, we found Justin Jackson to be the starting running back of this Los Angeles Chargers team, as Austin Ekeler is going to be missing. So if Justin Jackson's available in your league, even though he was in a tough matchup, he had some breakout runs. He got some work in the passing game. He was dominating majority of the snap count. Obviously, he was splitting touches here and there with Joshua Kelly, but I think going forward, as it kind of was established last night, Justin Jackson, another one of these options. Now, on the other side of the football, New Orleans Saints, I think Tre'Quan Smith going forward is probably a drop, a guy that I just don't want to even deal with right now. He didn't even see many targets. Benny Fowler was getting more work than he was in terms of opportunity, and it just wasn't looking good. But Emmanuel Sanders, in that same breath, was incredible. 12 catches. I mean, that is a number that you typically won't see a receiver end up totaling in a week. But with Michael Thomas coming back, I still think that Drew Brees and his comfort with Emmanuel Sanders is going to at least build a relationship as the year goes on, be the number 2 wide receiver there. So of course, Emmanuel Sanders is not a bad option. Outside of that, those are the waiver wire picks I wanted to mention. Of course, Herbert, we talked about him yesterday, but now at an even greater point, because he's just been incredibly consistent. Mike Williams, Justin Jackson, Emmanuel Sanders. Hopefully, if they're available, you could potentially go and pick them up in the waivers this week. Again, they're going to be on bye week, so you can't immediately use them. So choose wisely on what exactly you're going to do. If you're going to be hit with a huge bipocalypse with the Saints, Chargers, Seahawks, and Raiders out this week, then maybe you need to go elsewhere. But I think these are great options going for the rest of the season, especially their upcoming schedules. All right, now we usually transition to the running back matchups, but tonight there is still a game. There is a Buffalo Bills versus Tennessee Titans game that has been postponed because all the COVID situations to Tuesday night. And many of us have a lot of skin in the game in terms of what happens on tonight's football game, and so do I. I'm expecting good performances out of Derrick Henry and Josh Allen tonight, and I'm hoping Cole Beasley, John Brown, Stephon Diggs, these guys are ending up producing. But that being said, unfortunately, I do not have the graphic for how many points opposing defenses have been giving up to running backs thus far this season, because I usually get that statistic and that page from Yahoo. And they have that updated every single week. Because week 5 technically hasn't ended, they haven't updated that page. So what I'll do is tomorrow during the Wide Receiver Wednesday video, I will go ahead and show that graphic on screen. So for those of you who are looking for that, can go ahead and find it. But again, I will be mentioning a lot of the matchup, advantages and how many points defenses have given up as I talk about running backs, but I do not have the graphic on screen as of this moment in time. So hopefully you guys can catch it on tomorrow's wide receiver video. Outside of that, I think we're ready to go. I think we're ready to talk about my top 36 running back rankings. Again, there's going to be 4 teams on bye, so there will be no Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly, Josh Jacobs, Chris Carson, Latavius Murray, or Alvin Kamara on today's list. So remember that. Timestamps down below for those of you who are looking for a specific player. Outside of that, let's get into it, shall we? My number 1 running back going into week 6 of the 2020 fantasy football season is Ezekiel Elliott. Shouldn't really be a surprise. He's a fantastic running back. Last week, 91 rushing yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns. In the last couple of weeks prior to that, he was getting a lot of work in the passing game because the Dallas Cowboys had to come back in many of their games. But the reality of the situation for the Dallas Cowboys is they will not have Dak Prescott for the entirety of the 2020 season. He's out. That compound fracture is going to knock him out. He's already had surgery on it, and the road back is going to be a tough one for Dak. That being said, this team is going to have to rely upon Ezekiel Elliott to be the hammer for this offense. He's got to be able to dominate on first and second down and get them in an advantageous position throughout the rest of the season. And to be honest, they play in the easiest division in the National Football League. The upcoming schedule for the Dallas Cowboys should be very easy. Playing against the Arizona Cardinals isn't that tough of a matchup. I think Ezekiel Elliott, if in fact we get the center Looney back, we get ourselves Tyron Smith back at the left tackle position this week, who both missed last week, this offense is going to be humming even better than they usually do, especially in the running game. Zeke has been a beast. You just got to feed him the ball. Let him carry this team going forward. I expect him to do that. He's my number 1 running back on the week. We have ourselves King Henry, Mr. Derrick Henry. Now, he hasn't played tonight again. This video is being recorded prior to the Tuesday night game. But again, in week 6, he will be taking on the Houston Texans. Last year, he had some incredible performances against them. I mean, if we go back to week 17 of last season, he had a 200-yard game, 2 touchdowns, dominated that defense, and just ran through them. Now, that defense has looked better because of the firing of Bill O'Brien. It's kind of given a little bit of energy to that defense. But still, then again, that defensive line is not capable of stopping the run. I think the way that Derrick Henry has been used thus far this season, averaging 27 rushing attempts per game, 106 rushing yards on the ground, and has had 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. Of course, they didn't play last week, so they've only played 3 games technically. Derrick Henry's been a monster. He is going to potentially average himself 16 to 18 points a week in a regular league, not even counting the potential of him getting work in the passing game. I think that with the absence of a Corey Davis or Adam Humphries in the coming week because of the entire COVID situation, it will rely upon them running the ball even more. And I think Derrick Henry going into week 6 should be another one of these automatic plays. Moving on to our number 3 today, we have ourselves Alexander Mattison. And though many of you may be surprised that Alexander Mattison is in the top 5, I'm not kidding when I said yesterday on my waiver wire video that if you pick him up, he is an automatic play and probably going to drop 20 points for you. Last week, in the second half of the game, when Dalvin Cook was out, he had 20 carries for 112 yards, 3 catches on 3 targets for 24 yards, and 15 fantasy points. If you add a touchdown on that, on an incredible game like that, you have yourselves over 20 points easily in a half PPR scoring format. But the thing that I want to take into account is that they play against the Atlanta Falcons this week. And boy, is that going to be an easy matchup. Sure, the Falcons have cleared house. They fired their GM, their head coach, their special teams coordinator. They're clearing house over there because they know starting 0-5, it's probably not the best thing. But to be honest, playing against Alexander Mattison, who is a very talented running back, he should be able to take advantage of this matchup. I'm going to name a couple of the running back performances over the last 5 weeks against the Atlanta Falcons. These are point totals by running backs who have faced against the Atlanta Falcons. They've given up point totals to running backs in half PPR: 25.4, 19.6, 14.6, 19.2, and 21.6. Those are 5 performances in the past 5 weeks, and they've just been getting destroyed on the ground by opposing running backs, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Alexander Mattison is going to be able to get it done. It's one of the easiest matchups in the game on the ground, and I think with this offense, with Gary Kubiak, pretty much running this offense in a run-first mentality, especially trying to get the ball out of Kirk Cousins' hands, I think they're going to continue to succeed, and Alexander Madison's the key this week. Moving on to Mike Davis is my number 4. Shouldn't be a surprise. Mike Davis, prior to this past week, has put up a 19.1 and a 19.6 game. Just this past week against the Atlanta Falcons, he had a 25.4 fantasy point week. I mean, Mike Davis is unbelievable. 16 carries for 89 yards, 10 targets, 9 receptions for 60 receiving yards and a touchdown. I cannot wait until Christian McCaffrey comes back, because my goodness, if a guy like Mike Davis is able to do this in the Carolina offense, I mean, we're going to see some 30-point games out of Christian McCaffrey this year, and it is going to be beautiful for those of you who have held on to him or potentially traded for him. I mean, just putting it into perspective, in the last 4 games, Mike Davis has had 30 receptions. There's a lot of receivers that aren't even close to that. Go look at Juju Smith-Schuster's stats. He's not even close to those numbers in terms of the wide receiver position. So again, I mean, this guy's just been unstoppable. Mike Davis, another one of these great options, 100% a top 4 option this week, and is an automatic start until Christian McCaffrey comes back. James Robinson's my number 5. Again, this is another one of these running backs that, didn't have a great performance this past week. Even though against Houston it was a very advantageous matchup, he still got himself his work in the passing game, which is really going to be the difference as the year progresses. I mean, 7 targets, 5 receptions. 5 receptions is an incredible number. The 22 receiving yards, that number will increase over time. But again, if he's going to get as many checkdowns, he's not going to have as much room to, be able to make plays after the catch. He is not one of these receiving backs that's really elusive after the catch. But that being said, he's pretty much getting the work that Leonard Fournette got last year, and he's doing as much as he can with it. I know there was a report last week that were saying that the Jaguars want to get more touches to James Robinson in the second half, specifically on the ground. Well, you got to be winning games to do that. And unfortunately, they're not going to be winning many games in the second half. But this upcoming week against the Detroit Lions, there's a very good chance that they could be. The Detroit Lions are on average giving up 100 rushing yards to opposing running backs every single week. So again, there is a very good possibility that we end up seeing the Detroit Lions getting torched on the ground, and we have James Robinson putting up some pretty good numbers this upcoming week. I have a lot of confidence in him in the matchup this upcoming week. So again, on the ground, through the air, the potential of a high upside for touchdown should be a pretty good play for him. Moving on to Jonathan Taylor as my number 6. I always have Jonathan Taylor within the top 12 every single week. I have a lot of confidence in Jonathan Taylor. I just think that this offense, the quarterback position specifically, it's not looking great. If they move to Jacoby Brissett, I'd be extremely happy, because Phillip Rivers, it is a quick and swift decline for him. He has looked awful, but Jonathan Taylor still getting his touches. I'd like to see more touches go in his direction. He only had 14 touches this past week, 12 on the ground for 57 and a touchdown, 2 catches for 17 through the air, 14.4 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Not the greatest, but he plays against Cincinnati. That is a great matchup. I mean, just this past week, sure, the Baltimore Ravens weren't able to, have incredible numbers, but still, Mark Ingram had 11 rushes for 57 yards. That's a pretty good carry, yard per carry average there. I'll take that. 5 yards per carry, perfect. But in the last couple of weeks, in terms of yards to opposing running backs, Cincinnati's given up 75, 95, 86, 124, and 144 to opposing running backs. So again, in those 5 weeks, they've given up a pretty good chunk here and there. And I think, of course, Jonathan Taylor, this run-first offense, trying to keep the ball out of Phillip Rivers' hands, should be able to take advantage of it. That's why he sits at number 6. Moving on to our number 7, Mr. Todd Gurley. Shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Todd Gurley has been, quote-unquote, I would say it's a little bit of a revitalization. I did not expect to see Todd Gurley produce as well as he has thus far this season. He has a different gas tank that we didn't even know he had. Sure, sometimes he doesn't look like he's a great runner. His knee and his lateral movement doesn't look fantastic, but he is still getting the job done regardless. That's how good of a running back he's been. He's been averaging 5.86 yards per carry in the last 3 weeks. That is an incredible number. 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. This offense has been humming on the ground, specifically through the air. They have been just awful with Matt Ryan. But 14 carries for 121 and a touchdown against Carolina. And the most important thing, 5 targets, 4 receptions, and 29 receiving yards. We haven't seen Todd Gurley catch the ball this many times in quite some time. It's honestly been since 2018 where we've seen Todd Gurley get any sort of usage in the passing game with the Rams. So, again, this is a great sight to see. 23 points this past week. Plays against Minnesota. Minnesota, they've given up their fair share of yards on the ground, to say the very least. They're one of the bottom teams in terms of being able to at least handle opposing running backs. They really can't. Their defense is very lackluster in comparison to years prior, of course. But either way, Todd Gurley, another one of these fantastic plays. I'm playing his hot hand, play the stud. Moving on to Kareem Hunt as my number 8. Again, Kareem Hunt, even though he didn't have one of the greatest weeks this past week against the Indianapolis Colts, that is a respectable defense. They ended up really working hard and pushing the Cleveland Browns to the limit. But again, 20 carries on the ground. That is an incredible number. He is pretty much dominating the groundwork. D'Ernest Johnson, even though he had a couple breakout runs here and there, I think Kareem Hunt, it just looks like he's going to be touching the ball 80% of the time and playing, probably playing 80% of the time on top of it. 20 carries for 72 yards, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 21 receiving yards, and a touchdown. This upcoming week takes on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm always scared about playing running backs against Pittsburgh, but here's my thought process. This is one of the best running teams in the National Football League. In terms of imposing their will with their offensive line, fullback Andy Janovich, and their wide receivers buying in on run blocking. And of course, you have a couple tight ends here and there, getting David Njoku back. You can run some more 2 tight end sets. This offense has looked pretty good, but it's going to be tough for him, especially on the ground. That's why I think Kareem Hunt can be relied upon, but mainly through the air. We've seen him against Baltimore earlier this season. He found himself being a very viable fantasy option because he can still get it done through the air. He can easily catch up to 7 passes in a singular game, get himself a receiving touchdown because he's always pulling the eye of Baker Mayfield down there on the goal line. But of course, I think Kareem Hunt, even though it's a tougher matchup in terms of in between the tackles, I think he'll still be able to manage. Moving on to number 9, we have ourselves James Conner. So here's the thing about James Conner. In this similar matchup against Cleveland, Cleveland's been really good against the run themselves. I mean, of course, their secondary's been beat up, and that's where a lot of teams are taking advantage of them. But I think they haven't really faced a running attack like the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to wear you thin. I mean, they're obviously going to hit you with that play action. And because they have so many receiving threats, they end up spreading you thin and just running the ball down your throat with one of the better offensive lines in the National Football League. James Conner, even though only had 40 rushing yards this past week, still had himself a rushing touchdown, got himself some work in the passing game here and there. But majority of that game was a passing game. They had to take advantage of the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, have one of the better front sevens, but of course don't have one of the better secondaries. They took advantage of it. I could see that happening once again for James Conner and the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, where he has a little bit lesser of a performance. That's why I have him at number 9, but either way, he is still one of these relevant backs that has himself great performances on a weekly basis. We move on to number 10. We have ourselves Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones, similar to these other running backs, has some tougher matchup this week. Plays against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And though I may be a little bit hesitant with it, I'm still going to play my stud. I'm still going to get him out there. I learned that lesson the hard way this week with Miles Sanders, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The fact that Aaron Jones has been averaging 5.75 yards per carry this year, has had 6 touchdowns on a 16-game basis. I mean, he's looking like he's potentially going to get up to that number that he had last year, 19 total touchdowns. It's not out of the realm of possibility, which is crazy for this offense, but they've been that good. He's averaged 3 receptions per game. He is on pace. Now, the thing is, Tampa Bay has struggled heavily against receiving running backs. I mean, thus far this season, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, those guys have taken care of it. But not just them. There's other teams that have definitely passed to the running back position. Just this past week on Thursday Night Football, David Montgomery and Cordell Patterson, both out of the backfield, dominated in the receiving game against these linebackers from Tampa Bay. They've given up 32 receptions to opposing running backs thus far this season, not counting Cordell Patterson's work that he had last week. So again, they've been giving up a lot of work to opposing running backs in the passing game. Hopefully that's where Aaron, Jones takes advantage of it, and that's why I have him as my number 10. Of course, touchdown upside probably always there for him, and they've got a great offensive line. Ronald Jones is my number 11. I never thought he would end up here. I honestly never thought. But Ronald Jones has been undeniable. 17 carries for 106 this past week. He's had back-to-back games of over 100 rushing yards, and perhaps the absence of a Leonard Fournette has made the difference. But to be honest, he's just been a different running back over the last 2 weeks. Unfortunately, this past week, Thursday Night Football, he had a receiving touchdown. Should have been counted. Obviously, they didn't count it. He rolled into the end zone. It was all semantics BS. Doesn't matter. He is going to consistently play well. And the fact of the matter is, playing against the Green Bay Packers, this is one of those defenses that give up points on the ground. That is where they struggle the most. If you want to pass against Green Bay, try it. You're just going to give Aaron Rodgers more opportunities. They're going to take a lead. Then they're going to force you to pass even more. They're going to get their pass rushers ready, both the Smith brothers coming after you. But the thing is, Green Bay hasn't been great against the run in the last couple of years, to be honest. And on top of that, this Tampa Bay offense, they have been fantastic. This offensive line has really been getting to the second level, imposing their will. And I think even with the potential of Leonard Fournette coming back this week, Ronald Jones, a fantastic option at the running back position. I expect him to get that touchdown and have himself a pretty good week here. David Montgomery is my number 12. Another one of these Thursday night matchup guys from this past week. But David Montgomery really showed us that without Tariq Cohen, he is going to be used as the receiving back here. Yes, we had Cordell Patterson get work, but 8 targets, 7 receptions, 30 receiving yards. Had himself a rushing touchdown. Great. He's getting the goal line work. Even though his yard per carry average was abysmal, 10 total rushing attempts for 29 yards, 2.9 yards per carry average. That hurts. But that being said, David Montgomery still had himself 15 points because of the touchdown, because of the receiving work. Plays against the Carolina Panthers this coming week. Except for playing against the Arizona Cardinals this year, the Carolina Panthers have given up at least 20 fantasy points to every single starting running back that they faced against this year. Only Kenyan Drake was the only guy that wasn't able to do it. What a surprise, right? But either way, David Montgomery, one of, if not the best, running back matchup on the week. I mean, Gurley just ripped off for 121 and a touchdown against them. So, Gurley had 150 all-purpose yards. So I think David Montgomery getting more work in the backfield and more opportunity going forward should be a good option here against Carolina in week 6. Raheem Mostert. Now, I didn't know what to expect from Raheem Mostert. We saw him limited throughout the entire week, was coming back after that knee injury. Jerrick McKinnon was having incredible fantasy weeks and was getting a lot of touches. So I thought to myself, let's be safe. Let's not, throw Raheem Mostert out there and expect him to be the 20-point monster that he has been. I mean, let's not forget, prior to his injury, he was a 20-point monster, and I think he's going to eventually return to that. And we kind of saw a glimpse of that just this past week against Miami Dolphins. Though this game got out of control very quickly. 11 carries for 90 rushing yards. Raheem Mostert has still got it in the tank. 3 targets, 3 receptions for 29 receiving yards. He's getting the touches because Jerrick McKinnon disappeared completely. Houdini, bye, gone. I don't even know how, but he was gone. Raheem Mostert's getting the touches, whether it's on the ground, out of the backfield, will eventually get this offense going because Jimmy Garoppolo will kind of find himself. But my goodness, they're going to get back on track. And he's going to potentially be another one of these top 12 running backs going forward with the upside. Of course, I still think that Jerrick McKinnon will have a presence in that backfield that will reduce Raheem Mostert's value because I don't expect Jerrick McKinnon to be a goose egg every week, especially going forward. So I think Raheem Mostert should be a great play regardless. He's my number 13 this week against the Los Angeles Rams. We move on. CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, sits at number 14. I really like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think the potential of him going forward is at a pretty high level, but the issue that I have is his lack of usage down in the red zone. I mean, they are only passing the ball in the red zone, and they're finding a lot of success with it with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. They have found a lot of success down in the red zone, and especially with all these jet sweep motions, when you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman being able to catch the ball out of the backfield or take a handoff out of the backfield and just make a play because they've got so much speed to the edge, to the pylon, it's really hard to stop this offense. So they haven't had to use Clyde Edwards in the goal line situation. He's a smaller back, obviously, but losing Kelechi Osemele, their left guard, was a huge loss, and I think going forward is going to hurt them. That being said, until Clyde Edwards starts getting those goal line touches and at least more than 10 rushing attempts, I know he had a good amount of targets. What was it? 8 targets. Only had himself 3 receptions for 40 yards. If those numbers go up, he gets more touches per week. I'm more confident in starting him. But again, he needs touchdown upside going forward for me to have a lot of confidence. Joe Mixon is my number 15. The thing that I love about Joe Mixon is not that, he went from a 40-point week to a 9-point week. I don't like that kind of inconsistency, but the consistency of touches is what I am going to just 100% buy in on. Zach Taylor, because of Joe Burrow getting smashed this past week and that offense just being completely manhandled, they have to go ahead and they need to establish the run. They went ahead, they did that. Joe Mixon in the past 2 weeks has had 25 and 24 rushing attempts. On top of that, he's had 6 receptions each of the past 2 weeks. Those numbers, getting 30 touches a game, that is undeniable. Joe Mixon is eventually going to be 15 to 20 fantasy points every week if he's going to get the ball that many times. I think, sure, playing against Baltimore is a tougher matchup, and it's going to be tough for you to be able to split the tackles and end up making some plays, especially when the rest of your offense is unreliable, especially with that bad offensive line on top of it. But he should be good to go going forward. Plays against Indianapolis this week. I don't think they're the most impossible defense to play against. I think Joe Mixon, if he's getting the touches, they're keeping the ball out of Joe Burrow's hand to keep him healthy because he's taking a lot of hits. I think Joe Mixon could be a great play. Moving on to Miles Sanders in my number 16. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I've made mistakes, and I'll 100% admit it. Miles Sanders had a 22.9 fantasy point week. 100%. I should have just played my studs. I benched Miles Sanders in my own leagues, and it probably screwed me over. and was the ultimate reason why I lost. I mean, even though, Matt Ryan and some other players didn't do well either. But I think ultimately you got to play your studs. I got away from that. I got a little too cute. But let me preface. The fact that Miles Sanders had one rush for 75 yards and a touchdown. That's great and all. I mean, anytime you can do that, that's beautiful. But just to put it in perspective, he had one rush for 75 yards. The other 10 rushes against the Pittsburgh Steelers accounted for 5 total rushing yards. He only had 2 catches for 14 yards on the ground. He was bottled up, except for that one play where he was shot out of a cannon and went for 75. And I won't doubt him because, again, 2 rushing touchdowns, great game. He's good to go. Playing against Baltimore, it is a tough matchup. Let's not, joke around with it. It is a tougher matchup, and it's going to definitely test Carson Wentz more than the Pittsburgh secondary did, which is going to make it harder for them to run the ball. But I expect Miles Sanders to at least be a top 16 back. I won't doubt him going forward. Moving on, Darrell Henderson is my number 17. So here's the thing about Darrell Henderson, which I don't like. I don't like the fact that Darrell Henderson hasn't been effective on the ground. 3 yards per carry is a joke. And the fact that he's done that in the past 2 weeks, a little bit concerning. That being said, he is the goal line back. He's getting, rushing touchdowns in the passing game in the red zone goal line situations. Those are all great. The fact that he's being relied upon there, fantastic. He's getting the most carries out of the backfield, beautiful. But Cam Akers is around the corner, and if and when Cam Akers is healthy and makes a couple plays and becomes the hot hand, it could hurt him. As of right now, if you're the starting running back of the Los Angeles Rams, you're going to get that goal line work. You're pretty much getting those Gurley touchdowns that we've always been relying upon over the last couple of years. So again, Darrell Henderson has himself some great value playing against San Francisco this upcoming week, which we've seen. They have, their kryptonite is themselves. Injuries have hurt them heavily, and I think, the Rams should be able to take advantage of it. David Johnson is my number 18. David Johnson had the most touches of the season this past week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which we expected him to. Of course, David Johnson, as of right now, seems to be a guy that's about 10, 11 points in a half PPR scoring format. He had 17 touches this past week on the ground for 96 total rushing yards. I mean, those kind of touches on the ground is fantastic. Obviously, the work in the passing game is going to be siphoned by the return of Duke Johnson. I'm not really too concerned about that. He'll get his work here and there. He'll get a couple catches to kind of help him out. But again, we're looking for touchdown upside. Hopefully against Tennessee, could be able to do that. Tennessee's defense, not the greatest in the National Football League, especially against the run. They've been kind of wishy-washy there. So I think if, in fact, David Johnson could take advantage of that this upcoming week, has himself pretty good opportunity to do so. If he's getting a lot of touches on the ground, this offense is looking better. I'm excited about his potential. We move on to Devin Singletary as my number 19 here. Singletary hasn't played later tonight. Again, this is being recorded before the Tuesday night game. That being said, this upcoming week, next Monday, plays against the Kansas City Chiefs. That game was scheduled for this upcoming Thursday because of the Tennessee Titans and Bills game. That has been rescheduled to next Monday. But he should have a full week of rest. Should be good to go. The last 2 games in terms of touches for Devin Singletary has been pretty good. 17 total touches and 23 total touches. That in itself, very exciting for me to see. Of course, with Zach Moss coming back, that number could decrease a little bit. I hope it doesn't. I hope Devin Singletary stays consistent because, again, if he can, within this offense, the amount of work he's got in the passing game, 4 catches, 5 catches in the past 2 weeks, if he gets 13, 17 rushing attempts, those are great numbers. Just got to keep consistent with it. If, in fact, those numbers stay, he's always going to be a relevant back. He sits at number 19 against Kansas City this upcoming week. Antonio Gibson. All right, so Gibson kind of disappeared this past week, but so did the offense, right? With Kyle Allen going down, there was a less likelihood of this offense really producing against the Los Angeles Rams. Again, we had Alex Smith come out there and throw the ball 20-plus times and have 37 passing yards total. All those numbers went to J.D. McKissic. And Antonio Gibson was pretty much rendered a little bit worthless in the second half, especially when the Los Angeles Rams were able to just pin their ears back and get after Alex Smith, who, again, I was having a heart attack watching him play. I was just so nervous. But regardless, Antonio Gibson should be a good play. With Kyle Allen back, I know he was, dealing with concussion protocol and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully he'll be back this upcoming week. It gives them a better chance of succeeding, of course. With Dwayne Haskins and all that, mess, he's probably going to be traded. So I think Antonio Gibson going forward should be a good option. Again, with Kyle Allen, he could end up being like a Christian McCaffrey of this offense, where he's catching the ball 6+ times a game, getting the goal line work, getting himself, 10+ touches a game. He'll be relevant, and I'm excited about his potential going forward, especially against the New York Giants this upcoming week. Playing against the New England Patriots, we have ourselves Melvin Gordon. So here's the thing. Melvin Gordon does have Phillip Lindsay coming back. that does affect them relatively. But the reason why I have Melvin Gordon as low as I do is because, again, here's the thing. The Patriots, they probably won't have their best defender on the field. Stephon Gilmore, he will be on the COVID IR list. But that being said, they still have a pretty good defense, and they're going to push whoever's at quarterback, whether it's Drew Lock or Brett Rippon, to the limit. And that's definitely going to be the question at hand. What exactly are we going to see from this Denver Broncos offense? Sure, they can compete with the New York Jets, but the New York Jets would get smacked by Bill Belichick. So the question is, at this moment in time, what can we expect to see out of an offense from Denver against New England? I think we could see some respectable numbers. If he puts up 10 points, I won't be surprised. The touchdown upside, that's a question of whether or not this offense can get down there and be effective on a downly basis. As of right now, he's had pretty good weeks. Obviously, their game this past week was postponed, so he's had an entire bye week, should be healthy to go. But we've seen Melvin Gordon against some tough defenses, against Pittsburgh, against Tennessee, at times put up some great performances against even the New York Jets when everything was getting bottled up and they were run committing as much as they were. He was able to break out some runs. So I have confidence in him. I'm just not 100% buying in on the idea that he could have a breakout incredible performance against Bill Belichick's defense this upcoming week. So we leave him at 21. Moving on to 22, Myles Gaskin. Gaskin has been great. Mainly the fact that he's touched the ball as many times as he had in the last couple of weeks. That's the exciting part. This past week had 21 total touches, 16 on the ground, 5 through the air. The 5 through the air leading to 34, 16 on the ground leading to 57. That in itself, great numbers. 91 overall total yards from scrimmage, great. Had a rushing touchdown on the goal line. Bye-bye Jordan Howard. I love to see it. This upcoming week, they play against the New York Jets. Another advantageous matchup. He looks like he's officially the starting running back of this team, dominating 70% of the snaps, all of the touches, and it's beautiful to see. And he should be a great play this upcoming week against the New York Jets. Moving on, Kenyan Drake. So playing against Dallas is probably the best thing to happen to Kenyan Drake in a while. Obviously, playing against the New York Jets was pretty advantageous. It got himself, his 18 rushing attempts that he typically gets on the ground, had himself his rushing touchdown that kind of balanced everything out. But again, I don't think that Dallas is very good against the run. They're probably going to struggle. It's going to be a matter of whether Kenyan Drake or Chase Edmonds scores a touchdown and how that's going to work out. But I do expect this to be a back and forth matchup. And I expect to find Kenyan Drake succeeding on the ground, regardless of what his offensive line does, because that Dallas defense has been atrocious over the last couple of weeks. Whether it's stopping, the run or through the air, it doesn't really matter. They just have not been consistent at any capacity there. Moving on to our 24, it is Chase Edmonds. I wanted to talk about both of these backs because I think they're both as valuable as one another. Even though Kenyan Drake will dominate the work on the ground, Chase Edmonds always has that that red zone upside. He is always in the backfield in the red zone, catching the ball out of the backfield. I mean, there's been multiple weeks where Kyler Murray has overthrown touchdowns, or he's come 1 yard short of a touchdown, or different circumstances that have upheld Chase Edmonds to becoming a consistent top 24 back in this fantasy landscape with just the touchdown upside. I think this upcoming week against Dallas, if in fact there's a back and forth matchup, we could see a lot of Chase Edmonds in the passing game, similar to last week, catching himself 5 passes for 60 yards, getting himself a receiving touchdown. These aren't things out of the realm of possibility, and that's why he sits at number 24 for me this week. Moving on, we have ourselves number 25, Devonta Freeman, somebody who played against Dallas last week and was quite successful at that, to be honest. So here's the thing, Devonta Freeman plays against the Washington football team. Should be a great matchup. Again, he's really found his footing. The fact that he's actually been as effective as he has on the ground, has been healthy this year, getting the goal line work on the, for the New York Giants. And on top of it, has always been a capable receiving back. I mean, if we go back to last year with the Atlanta Falcons, the dude had games of 8, 7, 9 catches in a singular contest. That in itself, numbers that, of course, are going to help in fantasy half full PPR, or even a standard because of the receiving yards that you'll get as an influx. Regardless, as a 3-down back for the New York Giants, has been playing pretty well in comparison to what I really expected to see out of him. I thought he was pretty much washed up. Looks like he's playing pretty consistently, playing against Washington. They've been pretty good against opposing running backs on the ground, so that's why he's a little bit lower than expected, but I still think he's going to be of value this week. Number 26 is Adrian Peterson. They take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I mean, the last time we saw them, of course, David Johnson, 17 for 96, but Joe Mixon, had himself his 25 carries for 151 yards. The Jacksonville Jaguars thus far this season have given up 6 touchdowns to opposing running backs. So again, they've given up a lot of yards. They've given up a lot of points. Of course, the number 1 running back for the Lions is Adrian Peterson. I don't care what anybody says. Sure, DeAndre Swift will get his passing, points here and there, a couple of receptions. Kerryon Johnson's, who's Kerryon Johnson at this point, right? Maybe he shows up once every 4 weeks, and maybe this might be the week, but I'm very confident in the amount of opportunity that Adrian Peterson's got coming off a bye week. Should be fresh, ready to go, and I expect him to perform well for the Detroit Lions playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jerrick McKinnon is my number 27. I mentioned him a little bit earlier because, again, I have confidence in Jerrick McKinnon actually having himself a relevant fantasy, flex upside going forward. I know he didn't have any touches this past week, was pretty much rendered worthless, but the way that I see it, he's going to play the number 2 running back role in this offense. That's for sure. He should be the receiving back for this offense going forward. But to be honest, this offense they weren't themselves this past week. And I don't really want to 100% cut off the potential of Jerrick McKinnon because he's been 10 plus fantasy points every single week this season. And sure, the touchdown upside's got him there, but I don't expect him to touch the ball 3 times and just be done. There's definitely a possibility that he gets more involved. And I'm hoping that's the case. And I hope that, I'm really hoping that Kyle Shanahan just doesn't cut him off. Because if he does cut him off, that's going to be a pretty sad sight to see. And we could see, Raheem Mostert once again getting hurt because they're overworking him. But we'll see how this ends up functioning. Hopefully he could be the Tevin Coleman of this offense going forward. Tevin Coleman, of course, on the IR. Damien Harris is my number 28, playing against Denver. It is a tougher matchup. Denver is a pretty good run-stopping defense, but there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen. They got a lot of running backs that are getting opportunities, whether it's Damien Harris, of course, Rex Burkhead, James White. I still think that Damien Harris and his performance this past week, prior to the game postponing, in week 3 against Kansas City, 17 total rushing attempts for 100 rushing yards. That is a great game. With this offense, with the way that they want to run the ball, the offensive line, their fullbacks, they're blocking tight ends, they should be able to find some success this upcoming week against Denver. So I do give him the opportunity and the credit that he potentially have himself another one of these good games. Mark Ingram's at number 29. Mark Ingram needs a touchdown every single week. Until he scores touchdowns, I don't even want to play him. But I leave him at 29 because there aren't that many good running back options that I haven't mentioned yet. I mean, running back is getting extremely thin. There's the top of the pack. There's guys you can somewhat rely upon. And then there's guys that you're like, I can't. I'd rather play a wide receiver. And Mark Ingram is in that category. Sure, he can touch the ball 11 times on the ground for 57 yards, but no catches, no rushing touchdowns. The fact that, this is a pretty much hodgepodge running back by committee in comparison to last year. I mean, Mark Ingram's not even going to get close to 200 total rushing attempts like he had last season. And it's pretty sad because he has the potential of being such a great running back. Unfortunately, he won't be able to get there. And not even close to his double-digit touchdown, performance that he had last season. Moving on, James White is my number 30. This past week that we saw him, week 3, against the Kansas City Chiefs, had himself 7 catches. Here's the thing. If, in fact, this game is a tougher matchup for them because they don't have Cam and they have to use either Brian Hoyer or Jarrett Stidham, they're going to obviously have to pass the ball. And if James White is going to be the guy, which all signs kind of point to him being the receiving back over Rex Burkhead, he should be of value. Again, if he's going to catch the ball 7 times and then get himself a couple, maybe 4 or 5 touches on the ground, it's always going to be of value, especially, in fact, if the negative game script is there. Positive game script, he's still involved. Negative game script, still involved. So he'll always be in the rotation. It's just a matter of whether or not he gets those receptions and ends up potentially having the upside of a touchdown. That's why I have him at number 30. Moving on to Cam Akers as my number 31. Like I talked about with Darrell Henderson earlier, Cam Akers is coming. I don't know when it's going to happen, but Cam Akers could potentially take this job away. I mean, the fact that he had 9 carries for 61 yards, that's a pretty good yard per carry average in comparison to what Darrell Henderson was, contributing last week. What was it, like 11 for 38? Not a great game, but Cam Akers will eventually get there. Now that he's back from injury, Malcolm Brown's starting to fade out of this offense. Darrell Henderson struggling in terms of getting some, yards off on the ground. Cam Akers is on his way. They're going to continue to give him 10 plus touches a week. And as that continues to progress, could see a lot of production, potentially a 2-headed monster out of this Rams backfield for them. We have ourselves number 32. We have ourselves Le'Veon Bell. Now, the rumor that I heard earlier today was that Adam Gase is looking to trade him. Now, Adam Gase has never wanted Le'Veon Bell on this team. I mean, as soon as Adam Gase was hired as the head coach, they immediately fired the GM of the team that signed Le'Veon Bell because Adam Gase somehow has got the ear of the owner and just was like, hey, yeah, get rid of him. And then he's obviously stated before that he wouldn't want to keep Le'Veon Bell, that he didn't think he was worth it, all this kind of stuff. Just terrible stuff. But if Le'Veon Bell's still playing, he's still going to be trying hard. Hopefully, he ends up getting some work this upcoming week against Miami. He could be of value. I mean, Sure, the fact that Frank Gore is still getting more touches just is disgusting. But that being said, Le'Veon Bell can make the most of a very limited opportunity for the Jets. DeAndre Swift, my number 33. Again, playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars is a pretty advantageous matchup. And I think if DeAndre Swift was ever going to be given some opportunity to at least find some footing, it would hopefully be this upcoming week. I mean, he's only had 25 total touches this entire year. He's had 2 touchdowns, which have made his weeks. But again, in the last 4 weeks that we've seen them play, 2 of his games, what was it, like 9.2, 9.8, and then like a 13.4 game. He's almost had some relevant fantasy production to where he can be a decent flex option. I think regardless of what happens, he's always going to be the receiving back of this team. And I think with that, the upside of him potentially getting more touches on the ground could lead to some success. I like DeAndre Swift in this upcoming week as my number 33. Moving on to our next option, we have ourselves J.D. McKissic. Now, if we go back to where J.D. McKissic played for the Seattle Seahawks, even the Detroit Lions, now that he's with the Washington football team, he's always been a receiving back. He's always been a third down guy that can come in late in the games and be able to play a 2-minute drill and succeed in the passing game. And that's what he's done for the Washington football team, despite Antonio Gibson really being the head honcho in terms of the backfield. J.D. McKissic last week, obviously with the benefit of Alex Smith, had himself 8 total targets, 6 receptions for 46 receiving yards, and 7.9 fantasy points. Now, the thing is, he's been like this for the last 3 weeks. He's putting up 6, 7, 8 fantasy points per week, but in a full PPR format. I mean, this guy is going to be 10 points every single week. That's what it seems like. He is the receiving back of this team. And they obviously want to pass the ball to their running backs, whether it's Gibson or McKissic, because again, the offensive coordinator was the offensive coordinator of the Panthers last year. They passed the ball, Aaron was 100 plus times to Christian McCaffrey. He broke the record with 116 total receptions, all that kind of jazz. But again, they still have a lot of value. The quarterbacks for these respective teams, whether it's Alex Smith or Kyle Allen, still going to check it down. J.D. McKissic, not a bad option, especially in a full PPR, but in a half PPR, gets himself some value. Leonard Fournette's my number 35. I think with his return, he does add a different dimension to this offense. Sure, he's probably not going to get many touches. I mean, he hasn't gotten many touches at all this season. And even in the games that he has, especially against Carolina, it was 12 total rushing attempts. That's nothing to, kind of freak out about. I mean, I've seen Jordan Wilkins add 9 rushing attempts this year. I've seen, Gus Edwards put up 11 rushing attempts. So again, you could be your backup running back and still get double-digit rushing attempts on a weekly basis. That being said, I think the Green Bay matchup is very advantageous. If in fact they get both these running backs going, kind of take a little bit of the workload off of Ronald Jones, I wouldn't be surprised with LaShawn McCoy still a little bit banged up, and Keyshawn Vaughn getting smacked up last week, fumbling in a crucial scenario in which they pretty much lost in the game. The rookie might lose his spot there, and Leonard Fournette might get back into the rotation. The last option I wanted to mention was Jamaal Williams. Jamaal Williams, the last time we saw him, prior to the bye week, of course, had himself a fantastic game. 8 targets, 8 receptions, 95 receiving yards, 14.5 points. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the spot where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers struggle the most is against receiving backs. They have given up, 32 receptions to opposing running backs, not counting the Cordarrelle Patterson receptions that would have made it like 36. So in the past 5 weeks, they're nearly given up 6+ receptions to opposing running backs on weeks, about 7. So 6 to 7 on average. That in itself, not bad. On top of the fact that Jamaal Williams touches the ball on the ground 6 to 8 times a game. I mean, that in itself, on top of the potential of, the couple receptions he'll get here, he can get about 12 touches this upcoming week against Tampa Bay and find himself in an opportunity to maybe score a touchdown, have a couple good plays through the air on the ground, and be a relevant running back. I think in comparison to the field of what we're going to see, I think he's not a bad option going forward and somebody that you could potentially pick up for relatively cheap. Maybe he's available to go. As a lot of people don't handcuff Aaron Jones's backups. Regardless, those are my top 36 running backs for week 6 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Thank you everybody for watching. I do really appreciate it. If you like today's video, click that like button down below. Outside of that, make sure that you subscribe. We're almost at 30K. Let's try to get to that marker. Tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, we'll talk about the running back matchups. Hopefully, if you have somebody playing tonight, good luck. Hopefully, you can catch this W. Outside of that, we should be good to go. Until tomorrow, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys. Peace.